on Indigenous land. I'm located in Toronto, the traditional lands of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. We know sometimes this feels very performative, but we want to remind ourselves of the ongoing process that is colonialism and the ways it shows up in different spaces, including this one, and the ways we can challenge it as well. So we have a session coming up in August with the Social Finance Fund wholesalers. This session is going to be an hour long, and there's actually going to be opportunity for questions, which is very nice. But the wholesalers would like to look at the questions ahead of time, I think, because, as you know, they've been developing things on the go. I think for some questions, they may need to develop answers or may need some prep. So you can fill out this form if you have any questions, and they're going to be shared with the Social Finance Fund wholesalers. There is going to be space for impromptu questions as well. This is just to help them prepare. This presentation is going to be in English. So if you would like to follow along and you're a French speaker, we are going to enable, we have captions on, so you can put your language to English, no, to French. And I'm going to present Common Good Solutions. So Common Good Solutions are the leading experts in social enterprise, social finance, and social impact across Atlantic Canada. Their aim is to see every business enrich its local community and the lives of their customers, employees by utilizing the resources, tools, and training created by Common Good Solutions. And Chelsea, who is the president of Common Good Solutions, will be presenting today. So welcome, Chelsea, and thank you for your time and being here. And Chelsea, do you need anything from us to get started?
Maybe in the meantime, can also, welcome anybody else who's interested in letting us know how things are going with your projects, how things are going, or also otherwise, how your summer is going. I think I saw David also unmute as well too. Do you want to say something, David, while we're waiting for Chelsea?
I was just going to remind everyone that September 19th is our upcoming event that you might want to, it's a free summit. We're talking about the social enterprise sector, and we've done surveys from across all of our certified social enterprises, and we're putting the statistics together now, and we'll be releasing that, and it should be the early numbers are really, really exciting. And so I think that will be really a valuable kind of context for people to see what social enterprises are doing in community. And it will be in the spring, a couple of months ago, we did the demand side. This will be the supply side. So I think it'll be, if you go to our website and sign up, it's a free event. But if you want to also spread the word.
Great, thank you, David. And this is a yearly event that you do, right?
Yeah, we normally do the summit every year, but this year we split it in half so we could do the demand side separate from the supply side.
Oh, interesting.
So because we normally do like one day, and this year we thought, no, it's really much more appropriate to kind of split it up and get a better discussion for different. And also we wanted to do the survey this year. So.
Great, thank you, David. Thank you for sharing.
I filled in time for you, Chelsea. So.
Filled in time for me too.
David, you saved me.
Working.
Can you folks see my screen now?
Yes.
Great.
That's
Okay.
great.
Fabulous. So if everyone's ready, I'll get started. And again, my apologies on my technical challenges. So I'm so excited today to be here with you in this venue to talk about some of the research that we've been doing here across Atlantic Canada, across all 4 provinces. We've been working so hard to do that deep work, that deep consultation, to better understand our social impact ecosystem here in the Atlantic region. And so I'm happy to be here to share some of those findings with you. I'm coming in from St. John's, Newfoundland today, and happy to be with you. So the project that we were working with in partnership with all of you folks and with ESDC was really intended to understand the region as a whole and answer this big question, which is Atlantic Canada ready for social planning? So I laugh when I say that because that is a very big question. I would imagine all of you in every ecosystem that you're working in are kind of asking that question at the very beginning. But what we know is that sometimes when we ask these really big questions, we've got to go real deep and uncover all of the right questions that we should be asking in order to really understand how to answer this really big question. So the work that we've done over the last really 12 months has been working towards understanding the state of readiness for Atlantic Canada of all 4 provinces. So as we know, again, you asked that big question, we really wanted to distill it down. We felt as though that question was awfully hard to answer unless we went out to community and better understood communities in their own context and also in their own place and geography. And so when we were thinking, okay, how are we going to tackle this really big piece of research, we wanted to understand the social impact region through a demand lens. And so we feel like this is something that really kind of makes this type of work, trying to understand that a little different. So we're thinking about the people who are doing the work, the SPOs who are on the ground, trying to tackle some of these complex challenges through the mechanisms of their social impact work, whatever that looks like. We wanted to understand from their experience, were they ready for social finance? And what would it look like from an SPO's perspective for them to be ready? And so we really wanted to focus in. We did lots of consultations across all 4 provinces in community and with specifically SPOs to get us started in terms of our design. Then we went to intermediaries and potential intermediaries to ask this question and a series of questions of them around the social impact sector in their communities, in their regions, in their provinces, and more, I think, on a macro level in the region. But we also went to academics to better understand what academics were researching, what they were looking at. But our main focus was really talking to that demand side. So this is what we heard across Atlantic Canada. We heard from 205 participants, which is a nice, healthy number. We were aiming for 150, so that felt really good. And we consulted with 80 plus social purpose organizations, a variety of different incorporations, from the for-profit with the social impact and reinvestment into that social impact to, charitable models, to co-op models. We tried to get a real cross-section of folks contributing. And when we think about this service region in terms of, rural, urban, other, don't know, we did actually get and made an effort to try and really amplify that rural voice by going into community. So we made stops, all across all 4 provinces. And it's interesting how people interpret urban versus rural in Atlantic Canada, because some people would argue all of Atlantic Canada is to some degree rural. But if you ask someone in a remote community, perhaps on the coast of Labrador, they would absolutely say that they were, rural and remote, and St. John's is the urban center that gets everything. So it's an interesting thing. So it depends on, what your perspective is, but it also, in a lot of these cases, organizations that I don't know area, is that they end up servicing multiple regions, just given the need and also given the population density. When we think about social finance readiness, we wanted to ask this question straight off the bat. And, you know, the question we asked was, my SPO is able to measure progress and show that we're making meaningful contributions to our intended outcomes. That was really strong. And folks are really passionate and really confident in the work they do and the impact they have. So really that is a barometer of social finance readiness, isn't it? Is that ability to have the impact, to measure the impact and talk on the impact. So it was an important kind of indicator of that. And we did see kind of a really kind of even spread around generating revenue with any enterprising activity versus organizations who didn't. We also saw that, you know, that 59% of agencies surveyed generate actually 25% or less of their revenue. So we wanted to know what folks were working with when we start introducing the tool of social finance. Interestingly enough, when we asked about familiarity with social finance, we did actually get, you know, it was kind of even across the board. Some folks were, there wasn't a huge amount that said like extremely familiar. It was the lowest one on the bar graph. However, you know, folks understood it, they heard about it, they heard folks talk about it, an opportunity, and really a lot of in the rooms and talking to SBOs, many SBOs said, well, that's why I'm here to know more. Which half of our consultation was really kind of introducing the concept of social finance and understanding, and the other half of the consultation was really digging in to what SPOs needed to utilize that tool well. This is probably one of the most fascinating pieces of excerpts of the research, was that folks were really not totally sure if that repayable finance was for them. And so when we're talking about social finance, that is what we're talking, to some degree, that's what we're talking about in the tools we typically use or are talking about, and that this is repayable capital. And so there was a really kind of interesting discussion on that, because it really changed depending on what kind of organization, what the if they had experience with repayable capital before. All of those things were part and parcel to whether someone felt they were very likely or not at all. And we did get big swings between them. The other piece was that if there was a repayable loan available via social finance, how likely would your organization be to borrow money? And we did get most folks, it's an aggregate here, but a lot of folks were on that maybe and not at all range of things. So, you know, in terms of when we go back to that big question, what is a sense of readiness? We also need to talk about readiness, but also, are the tools the right tools for what organizations need in that moment, in that moment in time? And this is probably what underpins all of it. When I think about that last bar graph on how would your organization use social finance, the thing that surprised me the most when we aggregated the data was that there was a strong interest in using it in operational costs. There's a reason for that. I think one of the things that we heard over and over and over again, and we'll go through sort of some of the key themes, things we kept hearing were that there was just a lack of resources and a strain on the services that we just kept hearing over and over again through SPOs. So, you know, folks who are working in housing, I don't have to tell you the housing crisis is affecting not just large urban centers, but from Monte Vista to Charlottetown, we were hearing the same thing. And really the operational dollars aren't necessarily going far enough to deliver on the services as the problems get a bit more complex. And so interestingly enough, when talking about it, you know, the resource constraints were the things that always came up on just doing the work, which from a social finance lens isn't always the reason why you would borrow repayable capital. However, it does indicate what folks need to do the hard work they're doing through that SBO demand lens. This was probably one of the most impactful quotes of the whole 4 provinces for our team. And it was with a participant from Newfoundland and Labrador. And they said in the conversation, just straight up, without knowledge, there is no equity. And that really impacted our whole team, because one of the things that became clear is that if we're talking about supporting equity deserving organizations, folks who support support marginalized folks in any way, shape, or form, we can't necessarily talk about, it's really challenging to talk about this when you talk about finance at the same time. And one of the things that this particular participant really wanted to highlight was the fragmentation or the lack of knowledge in community is really not going to get us to a place where we need to be when we think about equitable finance. And if this isn't part of the equation, if supporting community is a part of the equation, then the goal of equity is going to be lost. So some of the main challenges we heard across the provinces, there's a real disconnect from power. So we're going to unpack this a little bit more in a later slide, but there's a disconnect with Atlantic region versus Ottawa versus Toronto versus where power is concentrated, where people are, money decisions are concentrated. There's a really long history of this in Atlantic Canada. I think about from, Cape Breton, and, at one point Cape Breton during industrialization was a thriving economy. And then through coal and things changed, and the federal government became more involved and they lost autonomy. That story is repeated kind of over and over again all across all 4 provinces in very different ways. And so this disconnect from power means, I think to some degree, is a lack of autonomy and decision-making and self-direction of communities. There seemed to be a real gap in knowledge and awareness of the social finance fund, of social finance tools. But when you got talking with people about their impact, boy, there's an enormous amount of skill and passion in the room. As a region, as 4 provinces, we don't often work together. I have a whole bunch of theories of why, but that's unrelated to the research, because they would be my theories, not necessarily the research. However, I'll share one of them with you. And part of that, I think, ties to the disconnect from power. And I think that disconnect from power is you end up chasing the power in Atlantic Canada sometimes. And so folks, instead of working together as a region, sometimes, given that if power is centralized in Ottawa or federally speaking, then it's you're less likely to work together. You're more likely to go to the place where you can have the most influence. And so what the consequence of that, I think, is oftentimes is ecosystem fragmentation at a regional level. We heard over and over again, organizational capacity is the biggest problem, is that people just don't have enough to do the thing that they want to do, that they need to do, that the community requires of them. And so that organizational capacity really oftentimes can stifle an appetite for something new. And so we heard about that a lot, that in community hearing, well, why are we talking about this when this is actually the problem? And that's really important. And sometimes can be frustrating if you're someone trying to move something new forward or be innovative. And that can always feel like, oh, we get dragged down by the same problems. But it's really critical to consider because it is a reality that a lot of these organizations and SPOs are facing every day. There's a real lack of research and data, surprisingly, around, if we're thinking about benchmarking social impact, or trying to even looking at, impact measurement through social return on investment or any of those tools, there's just a lack of data points to benchmark against. So that's kind of interesting. So it limits impact measurement or a couple different impact measurement models. And they're also, I think it goes back to the ecosystem fragmentation that perhaps maybe provinces aren't necessarily working together on bigger research projects on those kind of things, although there are some real bright spots, particularly in rural placemaking that we're seeing some really good research coming out of. The implications of borrowing were the things that really broke people's brains in the conversation. You know, there's the traditional granting model, the risk and risk tolerance of board governance, all of those things kind of going together. Well, what if I can't pay it back? What if our organization, will we tank our organization? Who will have to pay for it? Will we lose our assets? All of these kind of what if risk-based scenarios are coming at the table, all the tables across all of our provinces. And there was a participant that came very loud and clear to say, like, my board won't let me do this. And she, you know, in her bylaws, and she was like very passionate about the fact that this could be the thing that launches them, their tech product forward. However, their structure is really hasn't caught up with the work that they're in fact doing. And then finally, that coordination and common understanding of what we're trying to do. This was a great effort to start getting on the same page and to hear from that demand side about what they're experiencing. One of the things that we heard over and over again was like, are you coming back? How are we going to continue the conversation? Don't let this sit on the shelf. What's next? And so that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And then again, like these main opportunities, I've kind of covered them because I'm a bit of an optimist, even when talking about challenges. I want to go straight to the opportunities. You know, there are opportunities for us to do this work in a more coordinated fashion. There's some capacity. Someone described in a session I was in New Brunswick that we need remedial investment. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it, that we need to repair a bit before we can really kind of like actualize to see what's possible. One opportunity that came up in a bunch of different ways was using the social determinants of health as a framework. Given particularly the high rural conversations, things like access to healthcare, things like transportation, things like those are the big things that come up, which are all parts of the framework of social determinants of health. So that was, you know, of a particular concern. And at the same time, you know, economic development running well alongside of the social determinants of health framework. And then, like, can somebody just help me navigate? We heard that a lot, like, somebody tell me where I'm supposed to go. Someone described it as, we need a lightning rod. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting visual, the idea that, you know, the energy comes in and then it spreads out. And I liked that visual when a participant described, you know, what that opportunity could offer. And then finally, that self-direction keeps coming up. Is like, when are we going to get to a point where we have a self-directed way of designing and a new system that would be purpose-built for Atlantic Canadians? So the common goal, quality of life for all. That's the thing we kept hearing. And I just want to highlight how incredible hearing the stories of impacts, resilience, and innovation that we heard across all 4 provinces. It was a humbling experience for all of us working with CGS. So when we think about what's next, well, that's where, you know, the community comes in. You know, we talked a little bit about unpacking power, which is recognizing that financial institutions by design have generated a huge amount of trauma and are designed to marginalize people. You know, the access to capital and who has access and who isn't has for generations created an enormous amount of marginalization. So the thing that we're trying to do inherently in its structure has done a lot of harm. And so it's just like being okay with that, because if we're to get to something better, I think we just have to recognize that. And I think everyone on this call and all of the amazing work done with the Social Finance Forum, I think we've gotten there to ask and talk about those things differently. I will say, in that Atlantic Canadian context, that decision-making power came up a lot again. And I mean, to put it into context for folks on the call, I mean, I live in a province where there are lots of people who remember it being a republic. Newfoundland only joined Confederation in 1949. That's not that long ago. And there is a constant exchange of resources for stability, relationship here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I just want to just identify that context. I mean, I was having a beverage at the Duke of Duckworth, if anybody knows that establishment, reputable establishment here in St. John's, is pretty infamous. And, you know, the man beside me was a fisherman talking about the fact that his community on Fogo Island, you know, would have benefited or didn't benefit from Confederation, from joining the Confederation, because now we give away all our fish to international trawlers in exchange for healthcare. Like, these are the conversations people have apparently sitting at a bar. But it puts it into context that exchange of stability for resources oftentimes feels unbalanced, and it feels very crisis oriented. So when we have this collective understanding, what are we aiming at? So that big question that we asked before, we revisited it after all these consultations, said, did we get the answer? And the answer was no, because if you're trying to get to that answer, you got to aim somewhere else. And that's what we did. When we finished the first round of consultations, we recognized that we had to go a bit deeper in terms of ensuring equity deserving groups really had a specific voice in the report, which we have yet to release. You guys are getting a sneak peek. And we spent an extra, I would say, 2 months going in just a bit deeper. And I think we have to do that. We have to be okay if we don't get it, go a little deeper, understand, take the time to understand a little bit more, and also recognize that, like, you know, to get here, which is the social finance tool and what the tool looks like, we got to start over here. You know, we talk about building an ecosystem, and this is kind of if we're trying to aim at here, maybe we should start over here. This is really where some of the recommendations have been formed from. And, you know, this is the world's most simple ecosystem explanation, because we all know ecosystems they're messy and beautiful and regenerative if you do them right. But if we think about just what folks said and what they need from an ecosystem and some of those key themes, we need to think about the capacity that we've got, we need to think about capital, and we need to think about policy. And if those three things, as complicated as all of them are, can be equally weighted, and we can address each one of those, then perhaps maybe we'll be able to move the dial on that readiness question, because we've taken care of the folks, those SPOs from that demand lens. We've taken care of those folks in a way that has met the bottom rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so they can think about things that are different, things that are more aspirational when you take the crisis out of it. These are our observations as a team. My big disclaimer is there, but they're only ours. You know, self-direction is critical to the success. That's the thing that just became for our team doing this research and then looking at the data. You know, people in Atlantic Canada and SPOs, they want to be part of the solution. They don't want to be told what the solution is. We also feel or observed that in future, if SPOs need to be focused in the design. So if I think about everybody here on the call, familiar and probably has practiced, you know, human-centered design approaches, and so those who experience the problem have to be at the heart of the solution. We all know this. This is no different in the design of social finance fund, in social finance tools, in, you know, what's going to make the difference for those who are making the impact on the ground. They have to be part of the design, because it might not work if they're not necessarily involved in what it could be. So we run the risk of identifying new solutions that they weren't the pain points of the SPOs themselves anyway. And what I would I think I always have this like serious fear. If we don't do that, and then the fund is undersubscribed, oh crap, what do we do now? And so if we do that from the beginning, then perhaps there's a greater potential that those will be able to like accelerate those SPOs who are ready, and will be able to inspire those who see it as an option, and we start building those who need that capacity in that policy and that capital to get to that point. The other two quick observations is don't let compliance be mistaken for impact measurement. Because we heard a lot of folks saying like, oh my God, this is gonna be another thing that I have to measure and a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense that don't I already do enough of this? We heard this like exhaustion from SPOs, that they spend an enormous amount of time on administrative sides of the work. They at the core, you know, again, impact is the purpose. The people feel that, but one of the things they don't want is to be told what to measure, because it protects someone else's investment. They want to be like, they want to be encouraged and be proud of that measurement, and it not be about compliance. And then finally, don't let the limitations of the tool limit the impact. Social finance is going to work for everybody. There's one person who runs a shelter here in the city said, I can't put a revenue model on a needle exchange. That was this direct quote. And I said, you are right. And there's no reason, like, and that's not what we're saying. That just, this might not be the tool for that. And so in our interest to move the dial on something, we can't forget that essential services happen by SBOs in communities everywhere we live, in our neighborhoods. And like, this thing can't supersede what it means to deliver those really core services. Again, these are observations. They only represent one voice, which is our team, and it needs more than us. So we decided to host a party with 150 of our closest friends. And so in true Atlantic Canadian fashion, we said, okay, so we have this report, we've got these data points, we have this thing, we can't let this just end here. This report, we need to make sure that Atlantic Canadians that we talk to see this moving. The momentum is important. How many people told me, don't you dare, I came because I trusted you, Chelsea, don't you dare let this sit on the shelf. And I took that very, very much to heart. And so did all of our team. And so when we said, okay, we finished the research, what's next? We said, well, we're going to host this party. So what we did was with the help of our friends on the call, from CCEDNet, from ESDC, I think Robin on the call, and our partners here on the ground, we decided we were going to host a conference. And I think when we decided to do it, we had no idea how we were going to do it, but we announced that we were going to do it. And then we figured out how to do it. We were hosting the Atlantic Social Impact Exchange Summit. So the whole idea of this is bringing our learnings from all of our consultations and rolling it up into a 3-day event hosted here in St. John's, September 25th to 27th. And really, this is where we're going to share some of our learnings, but not spend all of the time doing that, because what we really want to do is run 3 full days where we inspire folks, we connect with one another post-pandemic. We start to facilitate what building relationships looks like across the region. We're going to get in community and get our hands dirty. So if anybody's coming, you can expect to go on a field trip. And then finally, the whole goal is to build a charter. Oops, sorry, guys. We're there. Is to build a charter as an ecosystem to say, what do we want this to look like? We've used this idea that can we generate what's possible and also what we want to prioritize as a community through that 3-day summit. And so that the folks who are in attendance were able to come, and those folks who are online who are able to join us online are able to say, we committed, we were part of that, we committed to it, to that statement of principles or charter, and this is how we want to see our ecosystem grow and thrive, and we've all been part of it. And so I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to Marisol and the crew for inviting me to do this presentation. Happy to take any questions. I'm really horrible at monitoring time. So if we're out of time, I understand.
We have
But
5
happy.
minutes. So
Pardon?
we have 5 minutes for questions.
Oh my gosh. I must
Or
be
now it's 4. So, but does anyone have any questions, any thoughts, anything they'd like to share with Chelsea and the group?
Take that share off.
Brian, go ahead.
Hey, and thanks, Chelsea, for the presentation. I know at the end you started talking about next steps, so I was curious, what was the permanence that you wanted to come out of the research that you've done? So besides the charter, like, is there any, yeah, I was just curious, like, what are your thoughts on what would be permanent that you'd create out of the research?
You know, it's really interesting. Like, I love this question, Ryan, and thank you so much for asking it. I think the thing we're hoping that really comes out of this research is that the research that at that conference, that people start creating their own permanence. I know that sounds like a kind of a weird way of describing it, but when I think about, and I come from social enterprise practitioner, you know, for most of my career. And the best thing that can happen is to nest, is to facilitate perhaps, or just hold the room, hold space so that people can form that themselves. I think what we're also trying to do, besides my little bit of observations, what I'm trying to do is not arrive to the solution. I can't be the one to arrive to the solution, because the whole point is that these SBOs are gonna get in there for 2 days. And I hope that once we get to, and we will do some deep engagement post summit, that when we have a clear direction of what folks want us or don't want us to do next. And I think it's, in terms of the research, I feel like was a really beautiful opportunity to engage really fully. But I also think that it's in the true self-directed fashion. We're going to get, I think we're going to be told what folks want us or don't want us to do in terms of what's permanent following this. I think we know something has to happen, given what we understand. We're just trying to be really careful that we aren't predetermining the solution before they have a chance to tell us.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Dave.
So 2 questions, Chelsea. One, do you think there's any rural region in Canada where if you replicated the research, you wouldn't come up with almost the same response of separation from power, need for capacity, lack of understanding? So I know you focus on Atlantic Canada, but I think it would be an interesting dialogue with other rural communities. I think of, you know, having been to Nunavut, having worked extensively in rural BC, in rural Alberta. I just don't think of any kind of area. I mean, the work we're doing even on Vancouver Island with small municipalities who are transferring from mining to tourism or new reconciliation, new relationships with Indigenous communities. So much transition going on. One question is, do you think if you replicated the research, the questions or the answers would be the same? So does that kind of infer that we should not look at this as an Atlantic only issue, but as a Canadian, rural Canadian issue, so that we actually build broader? And the second question is totally self-serving, is why in your ecosystem is procurement or the demand side not part of you have finance, you have capacity and policy, but you don't have the demand side.
Okay, so
2 questions.
that's good. I need to be clearer, because the policy is very much policy piece. It basically has procurement right underneath it in our bigger, more fleshed out ecosystem map, or the building an ecosystem. And David, we heard over and over and over again, procurement, over and over and over again. This was like an important policy lever. Now, maybe that's not where it needs to be, and I will take that because that needed to be clear. And if it wasn't clear to you, then it's not clear to anybody else. I'll definitely take that. But that was, as one of the big policy drivers, is procurement. And it's what we heard over and over and over again, is that the opportunity was so big, and yet we are so, our social enterprises in particular felt like their hands are tied behind their backs. The first question, I agree. I would be so curious to compare and contrast. This could be a specific sample size in Canada, in rural Canada. I don't know. I think, having lived in other regions across the country, rural regions, you know, the problems are often the same. I mean, I lived in Mike, around your hood in the townships for many years, and at Quebec, and you know, the problems. And I always thought when I moved here, I went, wow, Newfoundland and Quebec have a lot of similarities. And then rural Nova Scotia and Newfoundland have a lot of similarities. And like essentially every rural place, there is those common things. And that state of self-direction, I think, is so critical, because there is a frustration that comes in that, I think, sometimes what is interpreted as reliance, but really it's being just disempowered on the decisions. And so I agree. I would love to see this work, an approach like this in other places, and really see like, what is it like rural Canada? What does this look like when you compare and contrast? And I would bet that your hunch is right, that it would look very similar. But I got to be clear on procurement. Thanks for that, Dave.
Okay, last question.
Hazel.
Thank you. I actually have two, one of which is quick. So I'm a little concerned about the fact that your awesome looking conference almost directly in part conflicts with this Global Co-op Innovation Summit in Montreal I put in the chat earlier. That prompts question one, which is there an option to do it on Zoom or hybrid somehow? I know it's hard, but I mean, even if you put like a speaker in the middle of the room and didn't try to do video, or that's just a yes or no question. And then I have a more substantive question.
We're really going to try and do our best. We know Newfoundland's not an easy place to get to. And so when we're thinking about practicing inclusion, this is a priority. We're just trying to figure out how we're going to do it, given that there's a lot of action in the couple days. But regardless, we're going to try our darndest to get as much of it online as we can.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. The other question has to do with so I'm from the worker cooperative sector, and I'm wondering if you, in your excellent looking research, if you tried to separate out certain sorts of social enterprises from cooperatives, from other things, and analyze it that way, or if it was all or not.
Yeah, and you know what, that's a great question. So outside of knowing the spread, which I probably should have had in this presentation, the spread of sort of the percentages of respondents, we didn't go down specific tracks. So what co-ops need versus what social enterprises need, which versus what a social impact business or for-profit business looks like. So we didn't go that specific. One of the things that I think is an opportunity is with partners like the co-op councils. I think we could do that and go a little deeper to better understand the experiences of perhaps each one, or the needs of each one. I think that would be a great phase too.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Chelsea, for your time. Let's give it up for Chelsea.
Thanks, everyone.
So we'll see each other in August. Don't forget to fill out the form, and I hope everyone has a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.